So I wanted to record some thoughts regarding having faith and why I feel some people do and why some don't. And I feel kind of qualified in a sense to have some views on it, just because I spent many years as an atheist, in fact. So I didn't believe in God. And I've also spent many years as an agnostic atheist, and an agnostic theist, as I currently am. So I'm going to refer now to some notes that I've made on the subject. Rather than asking the question of why do people believe or feel they know that there is a God, it is just as interesting to ask the opposite, to ask why do people not believe or feel that they don't know that there's a God. Now, I've made some reasons why I think that there is disbelief. For many, it seems too incredible to believe in something with so much power, knowledge, and love. Some find evolution more plausible to a creator because the idea of a conscious being, that it could create the entire universe, just seems too fantastic for many people. Because even we theists who do believe in creationism cannot describe how God created the universe. The process is beyond our knowledge, but so too are other things like reincarnation and other miracles in general. It is that because, though, of a lack of imagination? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because we will all often believe and even know about creations that we cannot explain, either partially or fully. I'll give you an example. I don't understand how computers or cars or radios work. I'm not that scientific-minded, to be honest. But there are so many different fields of study, whether scientific, linguistic, mathematical, architectural, scientific, psychological, artistic, and so on. So many, in fact, that it's impossible for anyone to know expertly all areas of study, because we can know a lot about a little, or a little about a lot. Yet no one is an expert at all subjects, so there will always be things created in the world that one cannot understand, that are outside one's area of expertise and knowledge. A mathematician, for example, could explain complex algorithms and algebraic equations, but may not know how an athlete becomes super fit, or how a socialite is able to network well, or how an author can create a complex story, or how an actor can perform a scene so emotionally authentic. Even if one has some ideas of how that's done, they will not necessarily know fully and be able to do it themselves, not without adequate training and devotion. And we can't devote ourselves to learning all things expertly, because we are limited in our available time, in our energy, and also in our abilities too. So it is quite natural, ordinary in fact, to accept many things that are created in life without being able to explain, inevitably, how it's done. So why would we struggle, therefore, to accept God can perform and create things beyond our understanding? Of course, the claims about God are greater than those of our fellow man. Even experts in their field, none of us, however talented, have created stars, a sun, a moon orbiting the planet, with oceans and forests, weather systems, minerals, mountains, animals, and indeed mankind. And that's before we consider the nature of the soul itself, and the possibility of miracles and the reincarnation of the soul. Even so, however grand and seemingly unexplainable in rational terms, would many modern inventions today not be viewed as perhaps unbelievable to ancient people? Would people from thousands of years ago, even perhaps hundreds of years ago, think the idea of man flying in planes, beaming images through satellites, talking through telephones to people on the other side of the world, people of the ancient world would see that as just too incredible to believe if you were able to transport yourself back there and tell them? They'd find that too far-fetched, ridiculous, irrational, crazy perhaps indeed. As Arthur C. Clarke wrote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And indeed, the claims about God are indeed magic. The idea of creating a universe, the idea of reincarnation, the idea of performing miracles, things that seem to defy even the laws of nature and to defy our own explanations. But does that mean that they're not true and they couldn't be true? It's a question for all of us to ask, perhaps. The second point, believing in God as the all-powerful, knocks humanity off the top of the pyramid. It may be comforting to think that we are the best, the most advanced, that humanity are the rulers of the planet. Perhaps, though, we have idolized humanity in general, because it's also a way of idolizing ourselves specifically. To admit that we are inferior technologically but morally may be wounding to us individually and collectively, may wound our sense of pride, but it invites humility to admit that we are not alone teachers of life, but students of it, not the guardians of the universe, but its children. It means, moreover, that ultimately our destiny is not in our hands. We cannot choose what happens to us in the next life after we've died, if we even have one. No more than a student can decide if he has passed his exams or qualified for the next level in his course. It requires some humility on our part to submit to some regulation which we did not ourselves create. My third point, we don't want to be judged and held accountable for our actions. We shy away from all our bad deeds being known, exposed and judged. Whether our envy or greed or meanness, we have said and done things to others, will often go to great lengths to hide. Things that we perhaps feel ashamed of, or that we wouldn't want our fellow man to know about. We even go to great elaborate lengths, even living double lives, investing so much time and energy spinning a good image to show the world, whilst perhaps hiding away our worst faults. So how much more would we want to hide away from a God, if there was one, that had such powers, such knowledge over us, and such a power to judge and decide the fate of our very soul? Of course, justice is a double-edged sword. It's very comforting for those that have been wronged, yet not compensated by the world, to know that God, as judge, will know their sufferings and can compensate sufficiently. It's also comforting when the good we've done, the efforts made, are not always recognised by the world, yet will be by God. Yet we all have tendencies to do some good and bad, albeit to a varying extent. And so there is that tension between the comfort of God recognising us as victims and our virtues as well, but also recognising us as sinners. We all want the former, but no one wants the latter. But they come together as a package deal. If God is all-knowing, he sees both our faults and our virtues. Sees the good we've done to the world and the good that the world has done to us. The bad we've done to the world and the bad the world has done to us. It is sometimes argued that belief in God is wishful thinking. But would any of us really choose to have all of our faults exposed and to be held accountable? I doubt it. Clearly, we would all wish to avoid any exposure of our wrongdoings, especially when it comes to serious things or a large number of things accumulated over a large number of years. Fortunately, though, God does have the power to forgive us and is merciful to those that ask for it. Yet, of course, you don't get what you don't ask for. If we fail to take responsibility and ownership of our faults, how can we expect to be forgiven? Forgiveness with God, of course, is also conditional. It doesn't give us a green light to continue sinning and deliberately and unnecessarily harming others, our fellow man. Forgiveness is a regular need to recognise on a daily, weekly, and indeed monthly basis, and a commitment to striving to improve our moral conduct, which requires effort and dedication. And indeed, it's hard for us to recognise that as God and a commitment to God, if we recognise that, because that involves a lot of hard work and effort. But I would say, given that it's a worthwhile endeavour, a necessary thing, if that's the case. Point 4. Some people have found it just as hard to believe in an all-loving God as an all-powerful one. Many have suffered various abuses and or neglect by their fellow man. They may not have experienced what real love is, or only experienced it in a limited way, or they may have distorted notions of what love really is, having wrongly been taught and shown it. They may think it means being controlled, manipulated or coerced. They might think if it's someone who cares but will abandon them at some point, or someone who expects them to do more than they're capable of, or someone who wants to do everything for them and really doesn't expect them to work hard themselves and be committed to providing for themselves and others where necessary. Many people say that God is love, which is really a pointless saying if we don't define what love means. And since our loves for one another are flawed and corrupted to a varying extent, we will all have distorted ideas sometimes about what real love is, which is something we are therefore all learning, both how to receive it, but also how to provide it to others. Because none of us are perfectly, exactly knowing God, we do not know, therefore, what true power or knowledge or love really is. Rather, it is something that we seek. And so describing God like a parent is a useful metaphor, but we must remember even the best parents will make mistakes and not be all loving all the time. Even the best teachers, skilled in their area of expertise though they may be, may still be ignorant in some things and even make mistakes in their own field. Even the most powerful, the wealthiest, the strongest, even those have their vulnerabilities in life, since we all humans have our limits in our benevolence, in our knowledge, and in our powers too. And my 5th point, often it is ideas about God that people reject rather than God. This is, however, also true in our views on each other. We may have false impressions of someone from what other people say about them. Perhaps they have been misrepresented. So the best way to find out is to seek out the person directly and to gather from as many sources as much information as possible, trying to look at the information as objectively as possible. To meet them regularly, it is through our direct personal experiences that we really get to know someone well. Certainly other views can sometimes be helpful though, if they are honest and accurate. But unless we have some direct experience to compare that to, then how would we know whether other people's reports about them are true or not? We might assume one set of ideas are the only ones, Perhaps if they are prevalent, popular, where we live. If we're living in a cult, they may well be the only ones that we're exposed to, in fact. But larger numbers doesn't guarantee any truthfulness. It could be that the crowd think it because it's true, but it could equally be that they think it because they've been led to believe that by other people, mistakenly thinking it's true. There could be a number of other reasons. There may be so many competing ideas about God that will contradict sometimes, so that we might feel confused, which is the real version of God. We would have no way of knowing unless we can compare the claims to some kind of direct experience within our life. And I would argue that your life experiences are your evidences, just as my life experiences are my evidences that I need to look at, or the accumulated life experiences from the past, but the continuing ones that I will experience within the present, and those that I might experience in the future too. But yours, just as my life experiences, yours are your life experiences, just as mine are mine. We must be cautious about accepting other people's versions and accounts as absolutely true, and consider what our own experiences in life are. Being cautious not to lean to our own understanding too much, nor to other people's. And my sixth point, we may never have tried to pray, thinking or assuming it to be a ridiculous thing. I know that's what happened to me. I thought it wouldn't work or help me. Indeed, though I wasn't doing it. But unless you've actually tried something, how can you know whether it works or not? It's easy to make an assumption that something seems ridiculous. Unless we've actually tried it, though, how would we really know? Wouldn't it be unscientific to rule something out as useless if you haven't actually tried it? It would be like me saying a food tastes awful even if I've not eaten it myself. I could accept what other people say. Some people might say they like a food, some people might say they don't. But what is it? What indeed is prayer? How can we try it if we don't know what it is, though? It can mean many different things to different people, but I can only give you an answer for myself. For me, it means taking time to talk either in your head or out loud, to confess sins or your own faults. Not because God needs to hear those, but because I need to acknowledge what wrongs that I have done, how and why they are happening, and what can I do to help improve those things myself. But it also means for me giving thanks to God, acknowledging all the good things in my life, or the shelter, the food, the relationships, the use of the body that works well. This tends to sometimes be sung or sometimes spoken or thought, depending on what medium feels right for you. It gives me great joy sometimes to thank God, and can always lift my mood and reminds me of things that have helped me, and to be grateful of things that have happened in the past. Sometimes it's useful, especially when I feel depressed. For me also, it means talking through various issues, things that I'm concerned about, and giving over the issues to God, knowing in my heart that God knows the sufferings that we're going through and the hardships, and God knows what solutions there are ahead, gives me great comfort. And knowing that God knows a subject, even when I'm confused and troubled and I don't know the answers to many things, that gives me great comfort too. Knowing indeed that God will know when I've suffered some misjustice, or know when other people have, and the world doesn't always recognise that, gives me great comfort in that. God is aware of those things, reaffirming a commitment to listen to what is right, to have the courage to act on it too. Sometimes you can feel moved to being spontaneous, like talking to someone about something one feels inspired to. And I think whilst it's useful to have structured prayer sometimes that gives you a sense of discipline, I think one also has to be cautious that can be repetitive and just ritualistic, that sometimes you just feel led in the moment just to sort of to talk or to sing or to think of things, about any subjects of concern or something that you feel moved to. It also means asking questions, but also being patient about receiving those answers and in how those answers are received. It does not mean telling God a list of orders of what I would like to happen. And people have different things they believe in prayer, but I personally don't believe in praying for people to be healed or praying for myself to be. I don't believe in giving God commands and telling God what should or shouldn't happen and not making assumptions in what God would want, because that makes an assumption that we know more than God somehow, and that God is our junior that should be commanded and given orders rather than the other way round, that God is a parent-like figure that can command us because God has more knowledge and God has our best interests at heart. So I don't feel that it's about giving God a list of orders of who to help or who to heal, or praying for who an aggressor to stop their actions. We can't assume that we know what God would want. One must listen out for God's answers. But that's my experience. And we shouldn't assume that we know how God is going to communicate with us. But I'm still learning in different methods of prayer and adapting things according to what feels right. And I would encourage others to try what feels right for them and see how they go with it, and to try it before they make a decision on how it is. But really DIYing it is the only way to find out, I feel, like with anything in life. Hearing about it and observing it will never be a substitute for the direct experience of it. And point 7, many people may feel you having a belief in God is ridiculous. Indeed, you may be ridiculed for it sometimes, depending on who you come into contact with. One may meet people who think belief is stupid, ignorant, childish, backwards, regressive, deceitful, pathetic even. And people are entitled to those views. But one should try and come to one's own conclusions, not being blindly followed by others, nor blindly following others. Not to blindly accept those, whether they're professed in books, films, or directly in person. Many that believe in God are called sheep, yet in an atmosphere of militant atheists, one could just as easily say that an atheist is as capable of sheepish conformity. But whether you have faith or not, it should be for your own reasons, from your own conclusions, because of your own life experiences and not other people's. In point 8, people say, and I think this is a really important one, that there is no proof of God, no proof that God exists. Many will claim this, yet that begs the question, what is proof? What can I count as that? For me, I consider your entire life experiences to be your evidences. That is to say, one needs to consider everything within your life, all relationships, good and bad, all experiences. Yet are we able to step back and assess our own experiences accurately, objectively? Are our memories sometimes distorted? Are we sometimes biased? Do we edit and select what we choose to remember sometimes? Because we will have accumulated a vast amount of experiences over the hours, the days, weeks, months, years, decades, lifetimes even. This investigation is not something that can be answered too quickly, because there's a huge amount of evidence to consider properly, as well as the amount We may also feel overwhelmed considering the range of different kinds of evidence, both good and also those that invoke a sense of joy. Good times that may invoke a sense of joy, but also sad times that may make us feel depressed or angry or upset. So it may also mean stirring up a variety of difficult feelings to work through. Feelings of sadness, fear, confusion, or anger perhaps. Yet even those of relief, if those times may have passed. Dwelling on some emotional times can be difficult, yet it can also be necessary to take a full account of what occurred during those episodes within our life. This is an old quote. Some see the miracle of God in everything, but others see it in nothing. So some people would say that seeing the stars, the fact that plants can grow and that they're suitable to our biology, the fact that we are exactly the right distance from the sun for things to grow, not too hot and not too cold, that's in itself some see as a miracle, and the odds of that happening as being ridiculously remote. But other people would say it's not, and that it's something that could happen anyway. Of course, one problem in the search arises in that in order to look for evidence, either for or against something, we need to know what it is we are trying to prove. If I have an illness and I am doing blood tests to try and identify the type of illness, I would need to know what kind of thing I am looking for in order to compare the blood samples to. Or say that I am looking for a missing person. Wouldn't it help my search if I knew something about the person that I was searching for first? Of course, we need to be cautious not to make wrong assumptions of what God is like before we have begun that search. A search for a missing person can be seriously delayed or even prevented if the information we are using in the search is false. So scientifically, it's best to begin by examining what we believe and why we believe that to begin with. Of course, if God is a living, conscious spirit, then God will be able to contact us and have an evolving relationship with us, so that the investigation is not just confined to looking at old memories in the past, but also current, changing and organic new evidence and experiences that are constantly arriving. One may not see God, yet that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. One doesn't see a soul, only the body that houses it and the things that it creates, the food perhaps that it cooks, and the things that it writes or draws or sculpts even. One sees the things that humans create and their bodies, but one never sees their soul. Can we say, therefore, a soul does not exist because no one has seen it? Are we just a flesh and bones DNA, a machine, a physical being merely? Or are we something beyond that, whether we call it a spirit, a soul, or something, an essence that we can't quite describe or know? I would say that to me, I'm not just a physical, materialistic being, but something beyond that. The fact I can't see it in other people doesn't mean it's not there. I would also consider it an insult to say that somebody was merely only a physical being, that we are just that and not also something more. But just like we cannot see the wind, but only experience the effects of it and see its handiwork, so too it can be for soul, perhaps for God. Before either accepting or rejecting God, we should properly consider first, what is it we are accepting or rejecting? Is it God, or is it the ideas about God that we either accept or reject? I found the scientific method for me was to begin the quest from an agnostic point of view. That is to say, I begin by saying I don't know, And indeed, there are many things I still don't know. I start off with a blank page and fill in some information where I know, and I still have some blanks myself to fill in, even though some things may have been filled in. But if we don't start with a blank page, but start with things that we assume we know, then we may start with false information. If we start off with a true agnostic position, we say, I neither assume God exists, nor do I assume God does not exist. I don't start off by assuming either position. And that seems to me the true scientific position to begin the investigation, if not necessarily to end there. Before any investigation, I do not have evidence for God, yet neither do I have evidence against God. Can I either prove or disprove something without due consideration as to whether or what both evidence is and what we are looking for? Too many theists and also atheists have oftentimes beliefs that they have not questioned fully themselves. You can assess this by asking them why they have those beliefs and examining their reasoning for that. And I think if they had a true belief that we might actually be able to sort of assess why that is. And if somebody has a genuine sort of belief, it's okay. We might actually be able to know whether that's the case or not. Whether when we actually ask them and ask them to sort of give a reasonable explanation for that. And here are some reasons that I don't accept. For example, because a book tells me, because other people say that. That to me is a sort of lazy answer, and it has got no real merit to it, because it says it in, even if it's a very old book, you know, there's been truth and deception for a long time. There's been people making genuine mistakes, you know, for a long time, and that's in every profession, including writing and translation as well. So I think, of course, if there's not proof for something, it doesn't mean that it isn't true. Many things cannot be proven. It's so often the case that you can't prove many things that have happened in the past. Yet lack of proof doesn't mean that they didn't happen. Absence for evidence isn't always evidence for absence. Might there perhaps be some reasons why there's not always evidence? If we had absolute evidence, then there would be no need for faith itself. There wouldn't be this test of faith. Supposing one did have absolute proof for God as a judge, that one knew beyond all doubts, that we all do, that we will all be judged, that all